welcome to the Herondale Boy Support Group, a Shadowhunters fan podcast. I'm Allie.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Melanie.
And we're here to help. So, what is the Herondale Boy Support Group? This is a Shadowhunters fan podcast, sort of what it says on the tin. We're here to talk about the Shadowhunters book by Cassandra Clare. Most of us here have read most, if not all, of the Shadowhunters novels, and we have such a deep love of these books, so we really wanted to take the chance to reread them together and sort of have this chance to talk about them. Not just us, but you guys as well. Feel free to join in on the conversation. If you're listening to this or watching it after it's already been filmed, we are live on Twitch every other Sunday at 12 p.m. EST, so if you want to come interact and be part of the discussion, that's where you can find us. Links in bio wherever you find this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about who we are and sort of how we came into Shadowhunters. So again, my name is Allie. I found Shadowhunters very distinctly. I remember walking through a Barnes & Noble looking for a book, as one does, and I saw this really interesting kind of like bronze with like this shiny detail cover that had this man in a top hat and like this Victorian era dress, and I was just like, that book. I must know what is going on in that book specifically. And so I picked it up, and it was Clockwork Angel. And for those of you that are familiar with Shadowhunters, you know that Clockwork Angel was not the first Shadowhunters book published. But I read through Clockwork Angel voraciously, and then there was nothing else for that series. I was like, God damn it, this was before explicit language warning. But god damn it, this was before Clockwork Prince or Clockwork Princess had come out. So I then, after being really sad and depressed for like a hot minute, discovered that there was another trilogy that had been put out by the same author that takes place in sort of the same universe, and that's when I found the Mortal Instruments, and then since then I've been absolutely hooked on these books. Every time one comes out, I am the first one putting it in my cart, buying it, and then I'm reading through it. Nowadays yelling about it to Ginny, because Ginny is my roommate, and waiting for her to read it as well. So these books have been a big part of my life and a big part of things that I've really enjoyed for a long time, so I'm really excited to sort of have the chance to reread all of these. I do think I'm the only one in this group who has read all of them, so everything we read here, with the exception of the Eldest Curses, which somehow evaded me, will be a reread for me. But yeah, excited to get the chance to experience them all again with some of my best friends. So Ginny, how did you get here?
So my story is not quite the same, of course. I remember, being in, I think it was middle school, that I noticed this book floating around. Kids would set it on their desk, under their desk in those little fancy metal baskets.
Oh my gosh, those baskets.
Those baskets, right?
Those baskets.
Yeah, throw everyone back to your middle school, high school days. I mean, that's what this is about, right? Kind of throwing it back to some nostalgia. So for me, it was City of Bones, which is the first book from Shadowhunters, kind of released the novel, and sparked the trilogy and everything. But I was in middle school watching some of these books have their moment and like float around. So obviously, Twilight was probably the first big one that I would say took over my school, and I saw it, and I didn't get on board with it. I wasn't sure what was going on with it. It was also, Twilight was like this thick too, like it was pretty thick, and I was a little bit intimidated by this book with like a black cover and like a red scarf that was, or like a red ribbon, and it was like
it was the apple.
This chunky.
Apple was Twilight. The ribbon
was
apple.
Lips. Oh, yeah. You're right. Anyways, obviously, like I said, I didn't read Twilight.
Red was the theme. Red was the theme.
Red was the theme.
The red was the theme, which makes sense. Yeah. But I was like, I wanted to go around, and then I think at some point I heard it was like, oh, a vampire book, and I was just like, I'm too cool for that. Like, I'm not gonna read that book.
Ginny's too mature for that.
It's too mainstream. But then City of Bones started floating around, and it looked a little bit more like fantasy, a little bit more mysterious and interesting, I guess, to me. Like the title City of Bones was just edgy enough, I think, but not the vampire book that everybody else was reading. And the thing is, I was a person who got hooked on like these popular book series with my friends. So for me, I actually haven't had this experience of sharing like the Shadowhunters with my friends, really. I think I was the only one of my close friends who ever read these. So this is going to be fun for me to experience these with other people, but I did like the whole Percy Jackson thing with my friends. That was our big one, where we talked about it all the time. We read all the books as they came out. So I've had that experience, of course, with other series like Percy Jackson, like Inkheart, like there's got to be a couple other ones that are escaping me right now. Hunger Games, I think, was another one. That was a little bit later, but those sorts of things have always drawn me in, and Shadowhunters it's one of those addicting series that you can chat about with your friends. So I love it for that purpose. But I did start with Mortal Instruments. I read the first 3, then I kind of fell off of it for a bit until I think it was probably Allie was like, you've got to read, you've got to read some of these. And I was like, all right. And then I got back into it, and here we are today.
Listen, if I can push my hyperfixations on other people, that is what I'm going to do. So
that
absolutely makes sense.
That's what Allie does.
It's her MO.
Absolutely what Allie does. But, I mean, I'm glad for this, because through this we have met other friends. So I guess, Melanie, tell us about your journey. What brought you here today?
Yeah.
How did you get here?
How did you get here?
Well, see, the thing is, I would say I was a bit of a late bloomer to the Shadowhunters series. I discovered it. I don't remember what exactly year it was that the TV show that was airing on the CW started airing.
It was Freeform.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Freeform. It was after the rebrand.
CW and Freeform have the same vibe.
You're right.
Clearly, it's not like it's my favorite show or anything. I should know what channel it aired on. On Freeform, excuse me. But I absolutely loved it. I knew nothing about it. I just knew that actors that were in it I had seen in other things, and so I was like, "Oh, I like this actor. I'm gonna watch this." And the premise of the show seemed interesting. And when I found out it was based on a book series, I was like, "Okay, well now I have to read this book series." And so I started reading it. I started with Mortal Instruments, City of Bones, because that was what they were adapting first. And I was so in love with it and hooked that I read through the main 6 books and was reading ahead of what the show was covering. And the show sadly was canceled before it could cover all 6 books, which always, breaks my heart. But, that's how I fell in love with it. And then I've also read through the Infernal Devices series, so Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, Clockwork Princess. Haven't read any of the other ones yet, so I'm excited to get to those. But yeah, I guess I would say, like I said, I was kind of a latecomer to the series, but it's one of my absolute favorites now. I recommend it to anybody who was willing to listen.
Yeah, so this series is actually going to be fun, and then it's one that all of us are rereading, which is not going to be the case for all of them. So that'll be exciting. Tap into that nostalgia. Yeah. So, Ginny, tell us a little bit, remind us what we read in these first 5 chapters, because the way the podcast is formatted is we're going to take one book and we're going to break it up into 4 pieces. So you'll get 4 podcasts to 1 book. We are grown women with lives. As much as we would love to read a book a day like we did in our middle school, Ginny over here like, what lives?
I am too. Let's be honest here.
As much as we would love to read a book a day like we did in middle school, that's just not feasible for us. So we're breaking these up into more digestible, sort of easily readable within your working life chunks. So feel free to read along with us if it's a reread or a first read. But go ahead and remind us what we read about for these first few chapters of Clockwork Angel.
Yeah. So I wrote down just kind of like a little bit of a summary here of Clockwork Angel. Woo. Our book that we're on. We've got our first 5 chapters in. So it's basically, this is really just like an introduction to our cast of characters and kind of the conflict setting up this conflict. So the story opens up in London, 1878, with some witty banter from our beloved Shadowhunter Parvati, Will and Jem, our favorites here, right? And they're working together to hunt a demon, since Shadowhunters are warriors descended from the Archangel to fight demons, and that includes protecting the human realm. So when they find this dead body of like a human girl, and they realize this situation is a little suspicious, then they're like, we got to investigate this further. But then we kind of time skip a little bit, a very short time skip. We cut to the main story, and then we meet Tessa, who is traveling to London 6 weeks after this prologue takes place. She received a letter from her brother, Nathaniel, inviting her to come and live with him following the passing of their aunt, who was Tessa's guardian. So Tessa arrives, but then she finds out he's not there, and instead she was kind of tricked and eventually, just like ends up getting kidnapped. by these dark sisters. So that's great. Great start to this. And
well,
they
welcome
kind
to
of
London.
Right, welcome to London. We're kidnapping you. Terrible. So they force her, they kind of force her to unlock this power that she didn't know that she had. It's called like change. They call it a change. So they do this every day with her. The change,
which is
yeah.
really hilarious as an adult woman. Thinking about the fact that they're referring to
the change. Da da da. Yeah. Well, I mean, this change is also really painful and like uncomfy, and
yeah, exactly.
It's not great. But in this change, like Tessa is able to change appearance, like her appearance, into somebody else by holding an object that either like belongs currently or belonged to them. And it's also, we're gonna learn more about this, of course, but there's some tapping into like some of their deeper emotions and some of their memories when she does this too. It's like we started talking about. It was like, you know, it's pretty painful. It's dangerous, and they have her training and doing this for a while, for like quite. I don't remember the exact time, but they're doing this for a hot minute. And then they're finally like, you know what, you're ready, and she's like, for what? What am I ready for? And they're like, you're gonna meet the Magister, who's gonna marry you. Arranged marriage. And then she's like, that does not sound like something I want to do. And she tries to escape and fails, of course. But lucky for Tessa, Will and company come break in and rescue her. But they take her back to the Institute, which is their home. So then we, of course, were introduced to the Institute. And, you know, this case of the dead girl led all the Shadowhunters there, and they're kind of talking and figure out what to do, and they're like, hey, maybe you would be helpful to this investigation, since you were held captive by the Dark Sisters, and also we don't think you're quite a human, so we're gonna dive into that some, and you know what, if you stay here, we'll look for your brother, for realsies. And then she's like, well, I don't have anywhere else to go. I am a teenager. I am alone. I have no family, and I am frightened.
So sad.
I have no family and no brother, and I am frightened.
Exactly. So Tessa's like, I guess I'll stay here. And then we meet. Yeah. So then we kind of just take a while meeting our whole kind of cast of characters. We meet Charlotte and Henry and Sophie and Agatha and Thomas and Jessamine, all of whom we will be discussing in more depth, I'm sure. And then we're kind of reintroduced a little bit to Will and Jem, because Tessa has these fateful encounters with each of them too, that I'm sure we will be talking about more as well. Mm-hmm. And then this kind of leads us to we're going to be a team working on this case now, basically. So Will and Jem are going to go investigate the Tessa's former like prison, basically, with the Dark Sisters, where they were at, and Henry and Charlotte are going to go learn about what actually, like, where her brother actually is. And then Tessa and Jessamine go dress shopping. And yeah, we kind of end on a cliffhanger with Charlotte and Henry hanging out with Mortmain, as it were.
And for some reason, he knows that they're Shadowhunters.
He does.
Which is weird for Thames to know about.
Let alone know about Shadowhunters, let alone know about Shadowhunters, let alone know that they are them.
Exactly. So that's kind of what happened. Just a lot of setup here. So there's a lot to discuss. It was really cool reading these first chapters. I know a lot. We were kind of trying to, we talking to each other on the side, of course, and we're trying not to talk about this because we know that we're gonna do this podcast thing. But we're like, oh my gosh, I remember something, or oh my gosh, this is cool, or
yeah, like I texted you guys something like, rereading it, I forget how much I actually remember about this.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then, so I guess we're going to hop into some discussion here. So the way that this podcast is going to work, we were talking about that this is a lot of rereads for people. So we're not going to go into this isn't like a book review podcast necessarily. Our review is read the books. So, we've already read some of these. We love the series. And we're not going to be,
obviously. So yeah, worth the read.
We're just talking about stuff that we want to talk about. So there's not really, this is more like a loose thing. This is not a very structured sort of thing. We've got some discussion questions if we, for some reason, run out of things to talk about. Of course, if you want to join along and if you want to ask us some questions and you're watching this live with us, you can put them in the chat. You can interact with us offline too, and we'll work on, kind of these questions that you submit to us too. But I think this opener is a good point to talk about like characters a little bit. So one of the things that I really loved when we sort of meet all these characters is their introductions. They're all really telling introductions. So I wanted to kind of ask what you all, we get introduced to these characters, and I think that most of these introductions were like really good introductions of like whenever we meet somebody, we learn a lot about them just right out from the start. And I wanted to kind of ask what your favorite ones were.
My favorite line in I have so many favorite lines in these books, but one of my favorite lines in all of these books is just, Will smiled the way Lucifer might have smiled moments before he fell from heaven. And it's just like, it tells you so much about Will in a nutshell. Just like, because one of the things that we realize early on is that Will is a lot smarter than we give him credit for. Will causes mischief, but is he really? There's a moment later on, after we've met him, while we're meeting Jem, actually, who we'll talk a little bit more afterwards. And Will comes in, he's soaking wet, and he's like purposely like a little off kilter, and Tessa's noticing this about him. And he's making up this story about, oh, I went to the Devil Tavern, and oh, I got drunk, and not Six-Fingered Nigel. And then Tessa has this encounter with him afterwards, and she realizes that he doesn't smell like alcohol, despite having said that he's done all these things. So like, in that line, in the Will smiled the way Lucifer might have smiled moments before he fell from heaven, it tells you that there's so much more going on with what's like happening in his brain. And I think that's just a wonderful way to introduce a character and just kind of give us this idea. So I think that moment of his introduction is particularly one of my favorites. Yeah. And then that sort of ties into like his introduction with like the way I love, on top of the introductions of the characters themselves, the way they interact with each other is so different.
Yeah.
Like, the way we see Will interact with Jem is different than the way he interacts with, like, Jessamine and Charlotte. And then, so there's so many different relationship dynamics I think are portrayed really, really well.
Yeah. Sorry, Jenny.
Sorry, I was going to say, in that prologue, I remember you texting me too, you're like, there's the line! He says it, the line, Jem! Yeah.
Will calling Jem a disloyal bastard is my favorite thing every time.
Right out the front.
That's my favorite way to, one of my top 5 favorite ways to refer to Ginny. So.
Listen, I don't need to know. I love you guys, but I don't need to know. I was gonna say, from when Tessa and Will first meet, when he rescues her, from one of their early conversations, we can tell exactly what kind of dynamic they're going to have. Not quite like an enemies to lovers, but certainly like those bickering, like back and forth kind of dynamic. And so I have here what they say to each other. Tessa has just basically bit Henry's hand because she's freaking out. She doesn't know what's going on. And she's like, she thinks she's being kidnapped again. So she bites her who she thinks is her attacker, which, poor Henry. We love Henry.
She bit me!
I think I have that line.
Will says to Tessa, it's bad form to bite, he informs her. Hasn't anyone ever told you that? And Tessa just immediately bites back. No pun intended. It's also rude to go about grabbing at ladies you haven't been introduced to. Tessa said stiffly, hasn't anyone told you that? And it's just, I love it. I love they're just like, clearly like, so I love them. Just their bickering sort of banter.
My next favorite Will and Tessa moment is definitely when they're in the library.
Mm-hmm.
And Will's like, well, here's all these, like, weapons books and, like, Shadowhunter stuff. And Tessa's like, well, I want novels. And Will doesn't say novels are stupid, but he implies it. And then obviously he continues to talk, and he says that he knows a lot about novels, so he's actually able to, like, provide them.
Yeah. He's like, I don't read novels. And Tessa's like, yes, you do. Shut up.
He's intentionally antagonistic. And, like, yeah.
Yeah.
But then the way his attitude immediately changes, going back to sort of that interaction that you were talking about earlier, Allie, with when he says he was at the tavern and he was drunk, but he actually wasn't, kind of thing. Where I have it here, just the way that his like attitude immediately changes when he sees Jem sort of getting sick, with his
Maybe
coughing
we should
fit.
talk a little bit about Jem.
Okay.
Before we get into discussing this particular moment as well, because I do think that that's an important moment when we see Jem, because we're introduced to him twice. We're introduced to him in the prologue. He's introduced to us as the readers as this very competent Shadowhunter. Obviously, Will's parabatai, which is like his fighting partner, his fighting brother in arms, as it were. And there's a stark difference in like the way that Tessa's introduced to him and the way that we are introduced to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so obviously, going back to the prologue, we have Will and Jem are discovering this dead body and fighting this demon. And we see their relationship, which is very... they also have that sort of bickery relationship.
You disloyal bastard!
Disloyal bastard!
And then Jem calls him just William, which doesn't seem like it would be that big of a deal, but it's just... my heart. I can't.
They use their full names with each other. It is chef's kiss. And it's so beautiful the way that they just do these things. And then when Tessa meets Will, Jem isn't there, which is interesting because we've introduced Jem as Will's fighting partner. When Tessa's being rescued from the Dark Sisters, it's not the full Shadowhunter battalion. It's Will, it's Henry, it's Thomas, who is not a Shadowhunter, and yeah, it's just the three of them. So Jem is uniquely missing after he's just been introduced as Will's fighting partner. And then that night when they're at dinner, Jem's mentioned, but again, it's his absence that's noted. And he's absent even again the second night. So we're not meeting him as Tessa until chapter 5 of the book.
Yeah, it takes a minute.
It does. And Tessa hears a violin playing. And then she's wandering through the halls, which is a odd choice, but we'll talk more about that later, to like find the source of this violin playing, and then just walks into his bedroom like, hello? And also heartbreaking. Jem's first line is, Will, is that you? In this scene? It's just like...
Yeah.
These boys. Feelings.
Yeah,
and then we sort of get to meet Jem as he interacts with Tessa, right? And we have this... I don't want to say that Will's dishonest, because that's not the word I'm looking for. But Will lacks the earnesty that Jem seems to have in every interaction. That is the thing that Tessa noticed. Because Tessa's nosy as fuck in this scene. She's like, oh, he has dead parents, but I probably shouldn't ask about that, even though I want to. And I was just like, excuse me? Yeah, I don't have notes on the scene, so please jump in if you have.
Yeah, that's kind of what. Well, now that we've introduced Jem, I can go back to what I was sort of talking about. So as they're talking, and Will has come back from saying he was at the Devil's Tavern, and the whole Nigel and the being drunk or whatever, had a pint smashed over his head, whatever, you name it. That's what he said happened. His Jem starts coughing, and it's like really bad, and immediately Will's attitude changes. You physically basically see his sort of cocky attitude go from that to that of a concerned, like, best friend. And we don't exactly know at this point what Will is referring to, but he's asking Jem where it is, like where it is, so he can get it for Jem and Jem can take it. We don't exactly know at this moment what that is referring to, but the way Will is so immediately concerned about Jem.
Right.
It's a whole new side of him, and even Tessa's like, what's going on here? Like, Will's attitude has completely changed, and Jem is sick, and she wants to tell Charlotte about it, but Will insists that Charlotte doesn't need to know. And it just,
Will's
I love that
first instinct is to protect Jem.
Yeah.
Immediately. And he's, even after he realizes that he's talking about this, his first instinct is then to escort Tessa out of the room. He says, come with me, and then it's just like...
And I just love that it sort of shows that yes, Will sort of presents himself as this sort of cocky, like, I'm, the end-all be-all kind of guy. But when it comes to the people he cares about, he immediately has this switch flip to what I would consider is, we will see, later on, the real Will.
Oh, absolutely. There's this interesting dichotomy in Will, which of course we learn more about throughout the books. But yeah, he has this attitude that does shift on a dime.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think it's our introductions through Tessa's eyes to both Will and Jem is like so different. And we get that like kind of frontingness of Will and the moments where we can tell that it is kind of a front. And then Jem has this very like disarming like it's not he's like cut to the chase person, but he asks questions or says statements that are very like
he's earnest. He's a zero bullshit person.
Right. But it's not like harsh, but it's very like he says like his first question about, Tessa goes through her whole spiel of I was kidnapped and this and that and all this stuff and then like Jem's question is like, so what is your brother like? And she's like, what?
He's very genuine, and his genuineness is definitely an interesting and stark contrast to Will's just like 97.8% bullshit, especially in these novels. And it is interesting to see how Will interacts with Jem versus how he interacts with Tessa, because he is a much more genuine person near Jem. And it's like, I wonder why that is.
So moving on for a minute from the whole Will, Tessa, Jem trio, I want to talk about I want to talk about my girl Jessamine, because girl has always been my favorite.
That makes so much sense.
I totally want to hear about this, because like, I'm rereading this, and Jessamine, if I had read about Jessamine when I was younger, I would have hated her.
Girl has always been my favorite, but for reasons that I can't say yet.
Interesting. She's really interesting.
I love her.
She's interesting.
We first meet her, and she is like totally not what you would expect. You expect a Shadowhunter to be kind of, well, like Will and Jem, but she's like the picture of a lady. If you would say what a lady is supposed to look like back in 1878, you would basically have a picture of Jessamine. The dresses, a lady, doesn't fight, that kind of thing. And she literally hates her life, basically. She basically hates that she's a Shadowhunter. She doesn't want any part of it. And she kind of comes off as a bitch, but my girl just tells it as it is. She just tells it as it is. And one of my favorite lines that she says it in chapter 3. Tessa is basically showing off her power because everyone's questioning her and being like, you can't actually do this. And so Tessa's like, okay, bet. And she
give me your thing and do it.
And so
give me one of your rings.
She takes Jesse's ring. Jesse gives her a ring, and when Tessa changes into Jessie, Jessamine literally says, "Goodness, my nose is enormous. Why didn't anyone tell me?"
That was hilarious.
And I'm like, Tessa just literally changed her appearance to be you, Jessamine, right in front of your eyes, and that's your takeaway. I love her. I love her so much.
It is interesting how so anti Shadowhunter she is. And we already get this feeling of how much she hates her life. Shortly after that, Charlotte is assigning tasks, or this might be the next day, but Charlotte is assigning tasks at the table, and it's like, and Jessamine, you're gonna go do this, and Jessamine's like, no, I think
I'm gonna go shopping
Tessa
instead.
needs dresses instead, so we're gonna go do that. And Charlotte's like, but maybe you shouldn't. And Jessamine's look, there's this fun interaction where Jessamine's like, it looks like that dress is going to fall off if she breathes wrong. And then Will's like, I would like to see that.
Will's like, okay, let's see it. I'm like, Will.
William, please. And it's interesting watching Jessie in that dress shopping sequence too, because she's going to all these dress shops and she's telling this different story to everyone. And Tessa notices that she's having these elaborate conversations about people that don't exist, and in the last one she's a widower with her cousin from America who needs a dress, and she's just coming up with this life and stepping seamlessly into this society that she's very much not a part of. We know that Shadowhunters exist very separately from sort of mundane culture, but the way that Jessie in particular is able to step into this role and come up with this life that almost she would rather be in is really an interesting moment. And that is something more complex about a character that I think I missed on the first reread. Because I was only ugh, just means annoying.
Yeah, there's this moment when Tessa is changing into where she taps, she can sense the feelings. There's just there's actually a lot of pent up anger and disdain and stuff in that when she's changing, which kind of leads us into which gives us a clue in the beginning that Jessie isn't just what we see on the surface. Which,
I just think it's so interesting that she's such a, like, I guess, dichotomy, a difference between what we know about Shadowhunters so far and now seeing someone who adamantly does not want to be one.
Right.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about Will, we talked about Jeb, we talked about Jasmine. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Tessa. So I do want to preface, or talk a little bit more about this, and that, obviously we read these books when we were younger. We had a much, like, different viewpoint of the world, and these books are, what, Ginny said, like, 13 years old.
This one specifically, yeah, 13 years old.
So it's been out for a minute, so obviously, like, what I'm trying to get down to is this podcast is going to have moments where we're going to be critical of what we're reading. And it's okay to be critical of the things you love. That doesn't detract from the fact that we love these books. But there's, like, viewing the lens of something that's a product of its genre or a product of its time. We have, particularly in, like, the 2023 world, we searching for this thing of perfect representation for all. And that's a thing we're still a long way away from. And a thing that we were even farther away from back in, like, 2010 when this book came out. So I do think that there are some things that so it's okay to be critical of these things. That doesn't detract from my enjoyment. And that is how I'm going to preface how I talked about Tessa. Because I was not shy about how much I absolutely despised the character of Teresa Gray when I first reread this book. And it's interesting rereading as an adult, because one of my biggest questions before I started rereading is, like, I was wondering if I was going to be less critical of Tessa. Because the character Tessa we need to view through two lenses. There's the lens of the book takes place in Victorian London, which is a different time for women. And then there's also the lens of this was a YA book written in 2010, and we wrote YA heroines a very specific way in 2010. We sort of wrote these heroines without flaws, at least not flaws that were like meaningful. So many 2010 YA books had the heroine who was like, she's so pretty, she just doesn't see it, and, like, she's just, like, of average appearance. It's just, like, something that was, like, really, and there's something about a lot of heroines in that time that particularly, like, grind my gears. And Tessa was one of them. And yeah, so as I'm reading this, I'm trying to give Tessa so much grace. And I did have a moment where I was like, Tessa's smart. There's that moment when we see her with the Dark Sisters, and she's cuffed. Her hands are bound together, and she's like, I can't get out. And then she has that moment where she's like, I can't make myself, like, into a mouse or something to scurry away, but I can make myself just small enough to escape the cuffs. And I'm like, yes. And then obviously throughout that whole sequence, like, she bites Henry, which, like, if I thought I were being attacked, I can't say that I wouldn't bite somebody. you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
what she has access to, her teeth, or, what she can do. And and you were talking about that too, and I know that was one of your questions before this. And it's funny because, Allie was the one who told me I need to read Infernal Devices, and so I read them first as an adult. And I went into it with Allie being like, I hate Tessa so much, and I was like, all right, let's see why she's so awful. And I never got that. I have points for sure I know of that I'm like, she's annoying. But when this opens up in the beginning, I don't have, like, an issue with her, and, like, I know we've got our damsel distress trope, like, right off the bat, but at the same time, like, when you think about it, like, in the 1800s, you did not have cell phones. Like, how easy was it to kidnap somebody? And she didn't know any better. And I was like,
she doesn't know
that's
anyone
terrifying.
Here.
Like, and that could have happened to, like, any random kid, I was like, oh man, nah. So, like, the circumstance that she gets, it's not her fault that she just ends up in these places. And then, like I said later, she ends up in the institute, but she doesn't have anywhere else to go anyways. She doesn't have any better options. She is alone. Doesn't know where her family is. When she ends up at the institute,
she is skeptical of the whole thing.
Yeah, she is. So I definitely gave her quite a bit of grace, like, just seeing her thrust into these situations where you don't have, like, the internet or, like, money or things to help you be independent as much in this situation, which, again, kind of product of the time, and then, that factor of it too.
And
yeah.
But it was interesting reading the I never read, like, introductions when I was reading books, because that's boring. But sort of as an adult, those are things that things I look at. And it was interesting reading this introduction because Cassie Clare talks about how she wanted Tessa to be a heroine that girls could look up to and like have this independence. And I'm like, and I'm reading this book, and Tessa has her moments. Of course, we're only 5 chapters in right now, but Tessa has her moments. And then also I feel like the moment she lost me when I was reading the first time as a small was Tessa talks about Charlotte, and she's like, she can't fight because she's a lady. And like, that's kind of, and she's like reading the codex, and she sees the Shadowhunter gear, which is obviously pants, because that's what makes sense. And she's like, surely Tessa and Jessamine don't wear these ridiculous outfits. And I'm just like, I feel like that rubbed me wrong when I was younger. And now I'm seeing it as an adult, and I understand where it's coming from, and I do know that we see some shifts. Like, obviously Tessa becomes important. Like, obviously through her journey in the Infernal Devices, and then through her journey in The Last Hours. She becomes important, and she becomes, you know, more than this. But definitely in the beginning, I'm definitely still feeling that grating. And I'm interested in seeing how that may shift throughout the series, but right now I'm definitely just like, Tessa! Still.
I have a moment that I wrote down where I'm just like, something that Tessa doesn't really make sense to me. In chapter 3, when Charlotte is basically first introducing herself to Charlotte and explaining, you know, what they are and what they do, Charlotte says, Nephilim do not trap Dawn Mortals under duress. The Accords forbid it. And what I don't understand is why Tessa latches onto the Accords part of that conversation, rather than the fact that Charlotte just called her a downworlder. Like, Tessa should not know what a downworlder is. It should be like personally, if it were me, I'd be like, what did you just call me?
What is that?
It again.
I will bite you too. I bit your husband. I will also bite you.
Tessa shouldn't know what either the downworlders or an Accords are. But like I said, if it were me, I'd be more focused on the fact that I was just called a downworlder and I have no idea what that means.
So she may have heard that term. I don't remember how exactly that scene goes down. But I do know that that's a much longer kind of exposition-y thing. Yeah, because I know that she is referred to as a downworlder at some point. I think they might have talked about warlocks.
Yeah.
Maybe they did and I missed it.
Yeah, there is a lot of,
I don't remember where that comes in either, but yeah.
Which something coming right off of the 2 most recent series are The Dark Artifices and The Last Hours, which are both the most recent books that I've read of this of these chronicles, I guess. And it's interesting going back to a non-Shadowhunter protagonist. Because if you look at the Mortal Instruments, Clary is our protagonist. She's not a Shadowhunter at first. And then we have Tessa, who is not a Shadowhunter at first. So it's like we're having all this jargon introduced and then defined, which is an interesting experience coming off of The Last Hours and The Dark Artifices, where it wasn't defined. So it was like, yes, you've been here for a while, you know what's up. So there was like a difference in reading it with a character who's unfamiliar with the world and seeing it all through her eyes, where it's all new again, where it's all like old hat for me. So I did notice that as something interesting. But speaking of Tessa biting people, when she meets, I love when she comes into the line that I wrote down. When Tessa comes into the first night that she's like having dinner, and then Henry walks in. First of all, Henry's on fire.
Henry is on fire.
For the first time in this series.
I mean, as we like to say, arson is always an option.
Exactly, arson is always an option, and Henry understands.
Yes. So that's funny because I wrote him down as my favorite intro, other than Will, because I knew we were going to talk about Will and Gem intros, but I was like, man, Henry just comes and he's on
Henry's
fire.
Henry's intro is amazing.
It's so good.
I love Henry. I'm at this point in my life where I'm self-aware. I'm like, I would like to think that I'm a Will, that I'm funny and obnoxious and just like have this air about me. But I'm just like, but maybe most of the time, or like a Charlotte who's strong and confident and a wonderful lady. But I'm just like, I feel like a lot of the time I'm just Henry, and I just get really excited about things that that make me excited, and I just want to talk to people about them all the time. And obviously,
aren't we all Henry?
Now we're here.
Aren't we just all Henry on the inside?
Yeah. I just had this moment of maybe I'm Henry. Maybe that's not a bad thing, but yeah. But Henry's first line is, "I know you! You bit me!"
You bit me! Yeah. It's so good.
And he's not mad about it. He's like, "Hey!"
And Charlotte's like, "You're on fire, dear." And he's like, "What?"
What?
Oh.
And Will picks up the vase and is like...
And he's all excited because his jacket is, like, fire retardant. And he's like,
exactly, he's like, "It worked!" I'll have to test it on the other side. And Charlotte's like, "No!"
Yeah, they're like, "You're on fire!" He's like, "What?"
Oh!
Oh, I am! Exciting!
I must have been on fire for like 10 minutes!
Yeah.
Everyone's like, Henry! Henry is the underrated character of the Shadowhunters Chronicles. I'm sorry, he's fantastic. We love him. Though, and Henry is Charlotte's partner, which is interesting, because you think about Charlotte as a person, you think about Henry as a person, you're like, how does that happen? And there's strife in that relationship, which I completely forgot about.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, we see them going as husband and wife. They're in, like, different personas, but that is still the relationship dynamic that they've chosen. And Charlotte has this moment where, I did not write down the exact quote. Hold please while I look for the exact quote. Because she... Nope, I'm going forward. Oh god, Demon Fox's next chapter. Oh god, I love Demon Fox.
Allie!
Shout out to Demon Fox.
Focus! Focus!
I can't focus! I'm looking... It's in here because they're going to see Morton, Maine. And she's like, "Oh yes, I'm Mrs. Gray, and this is my husband, and we're looking for our, here it is.
Cousin, or, yeah,
yes.
like a... Right. There's a script, like, she has the script set out.
Yes. But an interesting look into the relationship that I was like, oh. Charlotte says, "You're not a bumbler, Henry," Charlotte said gently. She longed to reach out and stroke his face, push his hair back, and reassure him, but she held herself back. She knew. She had been advised enough time not to force on Henry affection he probably did not want. And for some reason, like, that line hurt. I was like,
see,
ow.
I find it interesting that you brought that up, because I wrote in my notes, and maybe this is just me remembering things later on, but I was like, Henry's such a simp for Charlotte.
He is! And, like, that's the thing that we know. That's the thing that we know from, obviously, from reading these books all the way through. But, like, Henry is, like, so in awe of Charlotte and the things that Charlotte does. But, like, Charlotte seems almost, like, apprehensive in these interactions with Henry. And hesitant, which is interesting. And I'm just, like, there's definitely communication issues.
There are. And it's interesting because they go into this thing, and yeah, she has a script, and she knows that she's gonna speak first, or that he has to say these things. And Henry, like, there's a moment where he, like, takes initiative about a thing, and she's a little surprised by it. Mm-hmm. Where, like, he says the line, and she thought that she was gonna have to speak or something, and she's like, "Oh, all right."
And then one more thing about... Oh, go ahead if you need to.
You can go.
I was just gonna say one other thing about Henry, and I don't know if we want to continue talking about this, but I was just gonna say, back to his initial interaction where he's on fire, he's talking about something called a censor. And from reading other books, we know what that is, but I just find it interesting that Henry's got a connection to all these Shadowhunter gadgets.
He does, and we see that continue on with the last hours with somebody else who has a connection to a lot of Shadowhunter gadgets. It's, like, really cool to see. That's one of my favorite things about the Shadowhunter Chronicles on the whole, is all of these threads that continue through so many books and so many years, and all these things are connected. Like, we call ourselves the Herondale Boy Support Group because there's a fucking Herondale boy in every single one of these books who is always a cocksure asshole. And we're just, and all of us as young women are just like, that one. Like, it's really neat.
Your Honor, I love him.
Exactly. Yep. He's broken, but I love him. And yeah, so it's really fun to see these lines, and, like, this whole universe is so interconnected in a way that's really cool. Cassandra Clare was really smart in the Shadowhunters Chronicles, where she created her own lore. She created her own thing. Shadowhunters are her thing. And she created this lexicon. And the thing about Shadowhunters is she wrote it into the first book that they are everywhere. That's a low fantasy setting, that they're, like, just underneath our noses. And in doing so, she's opened herself up to write all of these stories about all these other different places and times where Shadowhunters have still existed. And that's a really, really brilliant thing as a writer, to be like, that's really cool. And to have this thing, because she hasn't locked herself, because when you look at books that expand, the thing we all hate is when a piece of media is dragged and pulled so thin to where everything is now garbage, because now we're trying to, like, because we run out of material, right? If you lock yourself into, like, if I write a book and it's just about, like, one family or, like, one protagonist, then I've locked myself in to telling their story, you know? And there's only so many ways that I can make another story. I can keep talking about them in another book, keep talking about them in another book, in another book, in another book, and at some point, like, that story has to end, you know? But the way that Cassandra Clare has written these books is that she's written a concept. You know, she's written this group of people, and therefore has opened herself up to writing as many stories as she wants that can be as different as she wants, because they all happen within this same universe. I think that that's really cool and really smart.
And I'll say that I agree. I really like that fact because, especially, you know, I started with the Mortal Instruments and I wasn't hooked right away on the characters. We'll talk about that obviously more when we get into Mortal Instruments, and hopefully I'll see more or like have a different perspective going into it. But you know, so but I liked the world building part of it a lot. I liked the the low fantasy kind of thing. That was something that really drew me in. So when even when I was like feeling like all right about the characters but not like deeply connected, I still had something that I enjoyed about it that did keep me reading enough. That, you know, I was interested in enough, and then eventually I found these other series where I did connect strongly to different parts of either characters or stories too.
Exactly. Like I said, I started with the Clockwork Angel and the Infernal Devices, and then I went to the Mortal Instruments, and I'm just like, I liked the Infernal Devices so much better. And I've had that experience with all of her series, honestly. I've liked each one more than I did the last one. At this point, like, the Mortal Instruments is my least favorite series in the Shadowhunters Chronicles. And that's just because, like, the writing has gotten stronger. And, you know, like, the characters have gotten more interesting. And, like, if we look at The Last Hours, which is the most recent series, we have this big cast of just, like, so many different characters who all have their own unique motivations. And, like, that's more interesting to read at this point, you know?
We'll see. Melody hasn't read it yet.
There. I haven't read it yet. I can't say. So, I guess something else I can mention is something that doesn't really matter much, but in chapter 4,
everything matters.
They are talking about Agatha, who is the Institute's cook.
Yes.
Oh my god.
I have Will and Agatha as best ship written in my notes.
Nah, but like, I'm not talking about Sophie in this moment, but I do just want to quickly say I love Sophie. She is amazing. But when they're talking about Agatha being the cook, there's something about like chocolate tarts or something like that. And Will offers them to Tessa, and she's like, no, I hate chocolate. Like, she's like, I don't like chocolate, I hate chocolate. And Will's like, what kind of monster could hate chocolate? And I'm like, I agree, Will. What kind of monster could hate chocolate? If you know anything about me, it's that chocolate is my weakness.
That's true. Like, every other time I think I'm on some sort of call with Melody, and Melody's like, I'm getting chocolate. I'm getting chocolate.
No,
I thought
later
that was
on
fun.
in that same moment, Tessa's like trying to like get to they're bantering or whatever, and Tessa says something about like, well, maybe he and Agatha are gonna be a thing, and Will's like, I certainly hope not, for I intend to marry Agatha.
Yeah.
He's like, is eternal, and I was like,
yeah,
best ship.
I wrote it down like, Will Hart, Agatha, yes. You're right. You're right.
Then we also get mention of the Shadowhunter horses, Balios and Xanthos.
We do. Yep.
And that made me think
forever,
of our.
We don't talk about that.
That made me think of our Minecraft adventures, Allie, and Stardew.
Listen, anytime we all play games together, and anytime that there's like a horse in it that we have to name, it's always just we use the same two names. Yeah.
We're like, what are cool horse names?
Oops. Yeah.
We're like, what's something that we all like that we can theme this around?
Yeah.
So what's even more terrible is Jenny and I are writing a story about a completely different fandom, and I still think we
named
the horse.
I still named the horse Xanthos because I was like,
that. You know what? That doesn't surprise me.
Need a horse name.
It really doesn't.
Entirely different fandom. Bilos and Xanthos are objectively great horse names. And if I ever have a horse, that is what I will name my horse. Just
there you
to carry
go.
on the tradition.
Also, in the end of chapter 4, after the whole Gem situation and Bill basically kicking Tessa out, I think this was right after. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is before. Okay. I'm sorry.
Chronology is a myth. It's a myth.
Yes. Going back to quickly Tessa and being like a nosy,
She's so nosy.
Okay, so the gem thing is right across the hall from her, I think. Like, I don't think it's that far.
It isn't.
So she's not wandering endlessly.
No, but it's more like her thought,
this.
like the things she thinks she wants to ask about.
Yes, it's not about. I do think that just being like, I'm going to open this door to find this violin is a little strange.
Like she woke up from a dream where the violin music was in that dream.
Oh, okay. So maybe she's that.
Yeah.
So I don't find that situation that weird. She's like, wait, this was in my dream. What's going on?
But my nosy comment was more about like specifically the questions that she asked
right.
that she wanted to know about.
So
and
going back to the things that she asks and the things she wants to ask, it's mentioned earlier, I think by Charlotte or somebody that, they all live in the Institute because that is their home. They have no other family.
Right.
And so they're all basically orphans. And when Tessa is a nosy little and mentions this to Will, she's like, oh, so your parents are dead, yeah? And he's like, I didn't say that. And he gets all defensive about it. And I'm like, it's intriguing because if you haven't read it before, you're like, why is he getting so defensive about his family?
On that same note, when they're walking around the Institute and she's getting the Grand Tour and they go into the weapons room where Thomas is working, there's a Pixis sitting on whatever table or thing that they're looking at. And Will gets real weird about Tessa touching the Pixis. And then she's like, nope, bad things will happen if you touch that. And then immediately takes them out. And I wrote in my notes, parentheses, Mickey Mouse Clubhouse meme. That's a surprise trauma that we'll unpack later. So...
Literally everything about Will is a surprise trauma that we'll unlock later.
You're right.
I love my boys traumatized. Will is my Herondale bias, in case you didn't know. Will is my Herondale boy. I definitely remember reading through the series when I was younger, and I was like, maybe it's Jem, maybe it's Will, maybe it's Jem, maybe it's Will, and I'm realizing this as an adult, and I'm rereading this as an adult, where I'm very aware that my type is absolutely fucking broken assholes, who I would not go near IRL with a 10-foot pole, and I'm just like, it's Will, isn't it? The type
it's definitely Will.
That's how I feel about Jace. It's the same with Jace, which is my bias.
Yeah, and I remember...
I will not talk about Jason this particular episode of the podcast. Is not
one.
I will restrain myself.
But I remember when Ali was telling me to read this, and I was like, oh, who, and as I started okay, so which one is, Will or Jem? And Ali was like, I don't know. I was like, maybe Will, maybe Jem. But I was like, I feel like we're leaning a little Will, but all right. The more we talk, I was like, I feel like there's a bit of a lead toward Will, but they are both good.
And that's the age-old question about this series. Is it Will or is it Jem?
It is the question. And we will have many thoughts on that.
That podcast is going to be long.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait.
When we have to discuss the resolution of the shipping wars. Tune in for Clockwork Princess Part 4.
It'll be...
a year and a half from now.
It'll be a long wait, but it'll be well worth it.
I will be here flipping tables. But
yeah,
that's what Blizzard is for. Obviously, we have the triangle being set up right now. Obviously, it's very obvious. We have the young heroine who has been enchanted by Will, but then she's turned around and she's been enchanted by Jem. So, obviously, we see this love triangle being set up using only the information we have in chapters 1 through 5.
God.
Wessa or Jessa?
I would say, even with only the information we have in 1 through 5, I'm still going to say Wessa because I love their dynamic. I love the bickering. I love the, I'm not taking your, BS and blah, blah, blah. Jem is sweet, but I think I'm always a sucker for the, the not necessarily, it's either enemies to lovers or, the bickering, friends, but, bickering friends to lovers.
Yeah. I agree, Wessa. So part of it, we do have to, we only met Jem in chapter 5 too. So there has been more screen time for Will and Tessa at this point in the book. So that, that does tip the scales a little bit, but their banter, it's definitely set up that Wessa right now. But interestingly enough, like Jem has this very dramatic intro with him playing the violin in the moonlight and whatever. And I was like, man, if I had read this as a teacher, I would have been like that one.
He gets like
I would have been like, oh,
he gets like
the
romantic interest intro of the time.
It does. You're right. Exactly. Like Will gets a good like
Knight in shining armor.
Love interest. Intro.
Yes, he gets the bad boy intro, which is also great. But Jem gets the mysterious boy intro, which is also exciting.
Ginny's about that shit.
I am about the mysterious.
I wouldn't say
Ginny's always about the like.
But
he's not. But the way he's introduced is.
I was gonna say Ginny likes the mysterious broody guys.
Exactly. So, and I didn't remember it. Like, I don't remember his intro. I thought I remembered his intro being like, a very, YA boy love interest intro, but I didn't remember it being as broody as it was. And with the questions that follow too, with the very direct, like, get to the heart of the matter, soul piercingness of it. And I was just like, huh. I didn't remember it being like, I was like, all right, we got the mysterious boy intro here. I see.
I also
see what you're doing.
I see what's happening.
Having read the Clockwork Angel, the Infernal Devices, this is just an overall thought. Having read Infernal Devices after having read Mortal Instruments, that whole series, I love seeing like last names, like Fairchild and Herondale, and we get a mention of a guy named Benedict Lightwood in chapter 5. I love seeing, and it's kind of like how you were saying earlier, Alex, the characters and how they're always woven plot threads. There's always woven character ancestry or descendancy, whatever you want to call it, throughout the stories. Like, you always have somebody of that, and you're like, oh, there's that connection.
Fairchild, a Lightwood, and a Herondale.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And getting into late, I don't want to like get spoilery, but there's, I think in later books also Carstairs.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The Dark Artifices. Well, I guess Last Hours.
And the Last Hours.
Yeah. I think the Mortal Instruments is the only ones missing the Carstairs directly.
I won't say.
Oh, okay. We'll see.
Listen, my recollection of the Mortal Instruments is very vague.
We'll talk about it after.
Yeah. I can't wait. I can't wait to read Mortal Instruments after this long. I'm not reading them, honestly.
So those are the only ones that I haven't reread, barring the recent
right.
series.
I haven't reread any of them.
The Infernal Devices so many times. I've reread Clockwork Prince so many goddamn times, like double digits times. So it's interesting going back and rereading Clockwork Angel that I haven't reread as much, where I'm just like, oh.
I haven't reread any of them. This is my first ever reread through.
Cool.
Ooh, that's exciting.
All right. Nice.
Well, Ginny, you haven't reread these either.
I have not reread any Shadowhunters books, I don't think.
I'm the crazy one here. It's fine. We can all.
This is true. That's true. Let's see.
Well, we established that you're the Henry, just forcing your opinions on everybody. You're the special interest. The special. Yeah.
Okay, wait. So then, going off of that, even based on the first 5 chapters, if Allie is Henry, who are Ginny and myself?
Well, Ginny has to be Charlotte.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's true. I am Charlotte. It's me.
You're Charlotte. Okay, then who am I?
I'm
afraid. I'm afraid what Allie's going to say specifically.
Great question.
The thing is, Henry isn't particularly bothered by anybody's existence, so I can't even throw that nudge at you.
Well, would you be a Tessa? You would bite Allie.
I honestly, I mean, I feel like maybe I am kind of nosy. Maybe I would be Tessa.
You are a little nosy.
That is true. I can't confirm that I'm a little nosy.
What can I say? I am a curious person. I like to know what my friends are up to. Listen, I like, even with all her nosiness, Tessa's great. I'll take it.
She's a voracious reader. She's a library lover, and she has her moments too that are, she has her sassiness too about
chaos, queen.
Ginny is the glue that holds everything together.
Yes. If you know
I'm just
anything
here
about
trying
us,
to run this institute, and these
for
children are
anyone
running
who might be
amok.
listening that knows anything about the three of us, you will know that Ginny is the mediator between Allie and myself.
Keeping everybody well behaved, keeping this train on track, while these children go run amok, fighting demons and setting things on fire. I will. Xanthos and Palios will turn around right now.
Dad! Is there anything else?
Charlotte is such a good mom to Will, Jem, and Jessamine specifically.
She is.
Yeah. Interesting.
I love her. Okay, I have another note about Charlotte, but I don't know that I can mention it because it involves a character from Mortal Instruments.
Sure, go for it. Again,
it's not.
This is a rereading podcast,
right.
And we're not gonna get.
It's not like super spoilery. It's literally like just mentioned in the prologue that Charlotte is mentioned to be good at drawing Yahtzes.
Oh, okay.
And Charlotte is Clary's ancestor.
Right.
So I thought maybe it was like, it's like kind of explained in Mortal Instruments why Clary's runes are so powerful, but I also thought maybe it was kind of like a heritage thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Could be, yeah. That's a cool
I've definitely been mentioning some heritage things. Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of heritage ties.
Yeah.
For last hours. But yeah, the Mortal Instruments heritage ties, we're probably going to pick up last. So that's really cool that you found that.
So
part.
That's interesting because mild spoiler for the Mortal Instruments, but those books are even older than these books. So
depending on which book in the series, it's older than.
Exactly, it's older than this book. But because of my experience, so the Mortal Instruments was written first. The Mortal Instruments was written, and then the Infernal Devices were written. Because I read Clockwork Angel first, I have this very vivid memory of I took Clockwork Bones.
Clockwork Bones. New podcast name, Clockwork Bones.
Yeah.
Rebranding Clockwork Bones. How do we do all the work we did to read this podcast first time? No. I remember I brought City of Bones to Bassoon Camp. And that is
Okay.
Tell me you're a nerd in many ways. I brought the book to Bad Camp.
Tell me you're a nerd without telling me you're a nerd.
I took City of Bones to Bassoon Camp, and I remember reading it in my bunk. And I remember I had a bunkmate who had read through all of the Mortal Instruments. I'm on like page 20, and there was something about the way that Jace was described, and I was just like, this is some Herondale bullshit. And I close the book, and I go to my monkey, I'm like, true or false? Jace's last name is Herondale. And she's like, you're not supposed to know that for like 4 books. And I was just like, but this is some bullshit.
Jace, we'll get into him later. I have so much to say about him, but I can't. We'll get into him later.
But it's fun because these like family ties are still really strong. And it's like, if you know, it's interesting because I know in the Mortal Instruments timeline, the Lightwoods are known for their dark hair and bright blue eyes. And it's interesting because we're reading Infernal Devices, and we haven't met the Lightwoods yet, but when we do, they have brown hair and brown eyes. We're just like, when did that? And we know that Will has the dark hair and the light blue eyes.
I was gonna say, Will too.
Right.
He's got dark hair, and I don't remember what his eye color is.
Dark blue.
But Jace has
Tessa goes into the blue of his eyes a few times.
He's got blonde gold hair and gold eyes.
Exactly. So it's interesting, like, to see how, and we see how the dark hair, blue eyes genetics are introduced, and we see all these things, and it's a lot of fun. The familial ties are really cool. I know that being active-ish in the fandom, I know that sometimes that's a source of strife. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There was some family ties drama when the Last Hours was coming out. We'll talk a little bit more about that because it's fun.
Intriguing.
But yeah, good times. But it's fun to have a book series that's not about the exact same people, but there's still those similar ties. And there's a lot of, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of creative freedom in that.
I have another overall note that's more kind of a nitpick about Cassandra Clare's writing it specifically.
Sure.
So the characters, except for Tessa, are English. But I don't think they use English spelling of words. I don't know if that's I don't know, I just thought it was weird that it should be color and honor, for example, but with the U. And it's...
I mean, Cassandra Clare is still an American author. I would disagree.
I know, but I didn't know if, like, because
Fair
it takes place in
point.
England, that it should be, like,
interesting.
Colloquially, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a nitpick more than anything.
I know that as a writer, that would be a pain in my ass to have to go through and, like, rewrite things that I wanted to rewrite just because that's where the book took place. And also, they're not pronounced differently. If it was, like, if it had a different pronunciation, then I could understand, like, the argument for using it, like, specifically within dialogue context. But, yeah.
No, I just was a nitpick that I wanted to point out.
I hear your point. I just don't know if I agree. And that's fine. It's okay to disagree with your friends.
I think
I'm not saying.
I think it's a good point. I think
was...
because it's YA, we just it's one of those like details that we don't find necessary to harp on normally because YA.
I wasn't saying it was something you had to agree or disagree with. It was just something I was mentioning.
Yeah. You brought it up as a point, and I was like, oh yes, I disagree. It's okay. We're going to disagree on things on this podcast.
That's why we're here. Like that's why there's three of us.
If we all agreed on things, it would be really boring.
I know.
So...
I don't want to hold the conversation from anybody if anybody else has anything they want to say.
I don't think I have any points left that I want to get into right now either on my notes.
Okay.
I had a note that I was looking at. So something that I noticed reading this book is everyone has special juice. Special juice is a concept that I know Ginny is familiar with because just special juice is how we refer to characters that are just like extra and are just like really important. Because in the story they're given like some special abilities of some kind, and I'm just like, as I'm rereading this, I'm like, why does everybody in the story have special juice?
Everybody does. You're right.
Which, like, we haven't been introduced to Will's special juice yet, but Will has special juice. Jem has special juice. And Tessa has special juice, and I was just like...
I don't remember what Will and Jem's special juice are, so...
Well, Jem has literal special juice in the powder of...
Okay, but, like, not what you meant, but yes. I'm gonna, then, I guess, go back to the love triangle really quickly. There's a quote from Tessa's Aunt Harriet that Tessa remembers, in chapter 2, and it's something that Aunt Harriet says, which is, when you find a man you wish to marry, Tessa, remember this. You will know what kind of man he is, not by the things he does. Or, sorry, not by the things he says, but the things he does. Which is some solid advice from Aunt Harriet. And I was kind of using that, looking at it, based on the two different love interests. And I'm not going to get super into it because we still don't know a lot about them. But I said with Will, he definitely runs his mouth and kind of come off as full of himself and cocky. But the things he does and the way he acts kind of, are different. And then same with Jem. He's a sweet talker, but not much change between the things he says and does.
Right, I think that's interesting because if you look at Jem will say a thing and do that thing. Jem is a very earnest to a fault person. It is very straightforward, very direct, like that is just who he is. He presents himself like as is. So it's interesting because we have Jem where what he says and what he does are very much in line, and then we have Will where the things that he says are one thing and the things that he does are entirely another thing. So that is an interesting note. How it says to judge him on what he does. Huh, and not what they say. Interesting. I'm gonna ruminate on that. Write that note in somewhere. Write that note somewhere where we can come back to it because I do think
I will put it in later. I don't know. I mean, I have general other notes, but nothing like.
So on sort of the things people do and the things people say, something that I didn't pick up the first time is that we know that. So, I don't know how to phrase this as little spoilery as possible, but Tessa's on the boat and she's looking forward to going to London because Nate says that it's sunny every day and that the weather is beautiful. I'm just like,
I see what you're saying.
And like as an adult who is now familiar, and like I miss this being younger, but now as an adult who's like familiar with like climate of other places, we know that London's not a sunny place. And even Tessa notices that later on in the book too. She's like, the sky is gray, there are but stripes of blue in the sky. Like,
when she gets there, she's kind of like, it's cloudy and rainy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because we're like, is Nate a liar?
Right. Like, is Nate even alive?
Yeah, she doesn't know either. Like she doesn't. She just has to take the Dark Sister's word for it.
Exactly.
Really, because that's the other thing is like when they keep her captive, they're like keeping her there. Yes, like by physical restraint, but also by the we're gonna hurt your brother if you don't. And she's like, obviously,
and then she's nervous when she's being rescued because she's like, oh, they're gonna kill my brother.
And when she meets when she's in the Institute the first time and she's talking to Charlotte, she's like, what do you want from me? Like, what about my brother? And her bargaining chip basically is like, I'll do these, but you need to look for my brother.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the Dark Sisters do have something of Nate's. I don't remember what exactly the thing was, but they show her something that convinces her that they really have him somewhere.
Right.
I know that when she first meets the Dark Sisters and they produce her this note, she believes it's from Nate because it's his handwriting. And he is the only one that calls her Tessie.
Yes.
Right.
You're right.
I don't know if there was anything else after, but there might have been.
Yeah, threads that are still exciting to explore in the next few chapters. Obviously, we're going to get to see more of Will and Jem have gone off together, so we're going to get to see more of their direct interactions that we haven't seen since the prologue. Tessa and Jessamine are away and are shopping for dresses, so get to see more of that dynamic and more of Jessamine in general. Charlotte and Henry are together again. That relationship is interesting because I definitely forgot that there was strife. Again, for context, Ginny and I are hot off of reading the last book of the Last Hour series, which is...
That's true. We read it upon release, yeah.
Yeah. Because the most recent book that was released was Chain of Thorns, which was released in, like, what, January?
Something like that.
Somewhere, yeah, it was.
Yeah, so we're pretty fresh off of that, where we do still see these characters, but they're then older. For those of you who don't know, the children of
Charlotte
the
and Henry.
Yeah.
I'm excited to revisit
There's no spoilers about Charlotte and Henry having kids, because obviously they're married. So.
Well, okay. We'll talk about it off stream.
Yeah, but seeing their marriage is interesting because I forgot that like there's strife there, so I'm intrigued to see more about that. And who else do we have paired off? I think that's it.
Well, just the only person we really haven't talked about is Nate because we haven't actually met him. We've heard a lot about him, but we haven't actually met him, so we'll just have to see
about to learn more.
What's up with him.
Yeah.
Indeed.
We're about to learn more about his situation, at least. Maybe not about him, but yeah, when Mortmain's like, Shadowhunters.
The story, possibly.
Yeah.
Something's up. Nate's a dirty liar, and we need to figure out what's up with that.
Dirty rotten scoundrel.
Dirty rotten scoundrel. But yeah.
All right, so that's where we'll pick up, next time, right?
Yeah. So next time is 2 weeks from now. This is an every other week podcast. So that will be the 25th of June. We will be back here at the same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you have not followed the stream, please do so, because then you'll get the notification when we go live and are doing this thing. Next time we'll be live talking about Clockwork Angel chapters 6 through 10. So if you're reading along or you want to start reading along, that's the time frame you got. Until next time.
We also have a Discord if you're interested. I will, for any of you who might be lurking, I will put it in our chat right now.
There's a Discord. You can find links to all of these things. If you're looking for more ways to interact with people, we have... I've lost the train of thought. R.I.P. Allie.
We have social media?
Yeah, we do have social media, so you can follow us on Instagram and then Tumblr as well. Those are linked in our About section too, so you can take a look at those things.
Discord is also linked in our About section if you happened upon our page after the stream.
Absolutely, but we will see y'all then.
Yeah.
Bye!